In 1876, the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry, numbering 647 men, clashed with over 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors at the Little Bighorn, their war bonnets adorned with eagle feathers, lances flashing in the Montana sun. Within an hour, 268 soldiers, including George Armstrong Custer in his fringed buckskin jacket, saber aloft, lay dead. 5 companies utterly destroyed. This catastrophic defeat, costing the U.S. over 40% of its force, stunned a nation. Yet, in my life on the plains, Custer wrote, if I were an Indian, I would greatly prefer to cast my lot among those of my people adhered to the free, open plains. Why would a commander, whose campaigns displaced thousands of native lives, express such reverence for their freedom? Watch to unravel the paradox of a man whose actions and words still echo across the American frontier. George Armstrong Custer was born in 1839 in New Rumley, Ohio, the son of a blacksmith, scraping by in a small frontier town. From these modest roots, he carved a path to glory, becoming a brevet major general at age 23 during the Civil War, one of the youngest in U.S. history. By 1863, he led the Michigan Cavalry Brigade, earning fame at Gettysburg with bold charges that cost 257 of his men but halted Confederate advances. His rise was meteoric, fueled by a flair for theatrics and a knack for seizing opportunity. Historian James Donovan notes Custer's almost reckless courage, a trait that defined his career but foreshadowed his doom. This ascent from poverty to prominence shaped a man who thrived on the edge of danger, setting the stage for his complex role in the Indian Wars. In 1861, Custer graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, ranking last in his class of 34 but undeterred by academic mediocrity. The nation stood on the brink of civil war, and as he donned his cadet gray, he watched nearly half his classmates, 22 out of 55, abandon the Union to join the Confederacy. Among them was his roommate, John Pelham, a charismatic Alabamian with whom Custer shared late-night talks and dreams of martial glory. Their bond was profound, forged in the crucible of youth, yet the war's shadow loomed. As historian T.J. Stiles writes, West Point's class of 1861 was torn apart by loyalty and ideology, a microcosm of a fractured America. Custer's departure from West Point marked his entry into a world where personal ties would soon clash with deadly duty. Custer's affection for his Confederate-bound roommate found voice in a letter to his sister Lydia, penned in 1861. He wrote, "We could not think more of each other if we were brothers, a testament to a friendship that transcended the growing divide." He mused that they might never meet again, or if they did, it would be on opposing sides of a battlefield. This was no idle fear. By 1863, Custer's cavalry clashed with Confederate forces led by men he once called friends. The letter, preserved in the Custer family papers, reveals a young man grappling with the personal cost of war. Historian Lewis Warren argues that such ties humanized the enemy for soldiers like Custer, yet did not soften his resolve. This tension between loyalty and duty would echo in his later encounters with native warriors. On the battlefields of the Civil War, Custer faced former comrades with a ferocity that belied their shared past. At Yellow Tavern in 1864, his brigade charged Confederate lines, contributing to the death of General J.E.B. Stuart, a West Point acquaintance. Of the 1,200 men under Custer's command, 148 fell, a grim toll for a victory that cemented his reputation. He showed no mercy, driven by a code that allowed respect for foes but demanded their defeat. Historian Jeffrey Wirt notes that Custer's ability to admire his enemies while fighting them was not unique, reflecting a military ethos where honor and bloodshed coexisted. This paradox shaped his approach to the Indian Wars, where he would again face adversaries he esteemed, yet pursued with relentless vigor. Custer's nuanced view of enemies carried into the Indian Wars, where his foes were the Plains tribes branded hostile by the U.S. government. From 1866 to 1876, he served in campaigns against the Cheyenne, Lakota, and others, tasked with enforcing federal authority. These tribes, numbering over 30,000 across the Great Plains, resisted encroachment on lands guaranteed by treaties like the 1851 Fort Laramie Agreement, which the U.S. violated by 1868. Custer's role placed him at the heart of this conflict, yet his writings suggest a perspective less monolithic than his reputation implies. Historian Robert Utley observes that Custer was no simple Indian hater, but a soldier shaped by duty and circumstance, whose actions reflected the era's imperial ambitions. The U.S. Indian policy of the 1860s and 1870s was a machinery of dispossession, forcibly relocating tribes to reservations that shrank from 139 million acres in 1868 to 78 million by 1887. Custer operated within this framework, leading campaigns like the Washita in 1868, where his 7th Cavalry killed 103 Cheyenne, including women and children, sparking outrage among reformers. Yet, his personal reflections challenged the narrative of unbridled hostility. In letters and published works, he expressed views that complicate modern assumptions. Historian D. Brown argues that Custer's writings reveal a man caught between admiration and obligation, a soldier who saw nobility in his foes even as he enforced a policy that crushed their way of life. As a West Point cadet in 1859, Custer penned an essay titled "The Red Man for His Ethics Class," a romanticized lament for native peoples. He described them as alone in their misery, clutching blood-stained rifles on the verge of extinction. The essay, preserved in West Point archives, ends with the haunting line, "Soon he will be the last of a noble race who once existed but now passes away." Written when Custer was 20, it reflects a youthful idealism, simplistic yet sincere. Historian Evan Connell notes that the essay betrays a fascination with native resilience, a sentiment that lingered despite Custer's later role in their subjugation. This early work hints at a mind not wholly aligned with the era's genocidal undertones. Custer's admiration for native culture, though naive in his youth, persisted into his military career, surfacing in ways that defy easy caricature. By 1867, he commanded the 7th Cavalry in Kansas, engaging tribes like the Cheyenne and Kiowa. His encounters fueled a curiosity that went beyond tactics. He studied their customs, from war dances to hunting practices, noting details in reports to superiors. This interest, documented in his correspondence, suggests a soldier who saw more than savagery in his adversaries. Historian Paul Hutton argues that Custer's fascination with native life was genuine, yet constrained by his role as an enforcer of U.S. policy. His early writings laid the groundwork for the complex reflections in his later work. Custer's My Life on the Plains, serialized in the Galaxy magazine from 1872 to 1874, offers a vivid chronicle of his campaigns, blending soldierly pride with unexpected empathy. Spanning 256 pages in its 1874 book form, it details the Hancock Campaign of 1867, where 1,400 troops pursued Cheyenne and Sioux, and the Washita Campaign, which left 21 soldiers dead alongside the Cheyenne toll. Custer's prose is both boastful and introspective, praising native valor while justifying his actions. Historian Joseph Agonito calls it a window into Custer's contradictions, where respect for his foes coexists with accounts of their defeat. The book remains a primary source for understanding his mindset. In My Life on the Plains, Custer penned his most famous reflection. "If I were an Indian, I would greatly prefer to cast my lot among those of my people adhered to the free, open plains rather than submit to the confined limits of a reservation." This statement, from the 1874 edition, critiques the reservation system, which by 1876 confined 70,000 native people to barren lands, often less than 10% of their original territories. Custer's words, laced with irony, highlight the loss of freedom he saw in native life. Historian Richard Slotkin notes that this passage reveals Custer's grudging admiration for native autonomy, a sentiment at odds with his role in enforcing the very system he decried. In My Life on the Plains, Custer scoffed at the notion that reservations bestowed the blessed benefits of civilization upon native peoples. With biting sarcasm, he wrote that these supposed blessings came with vices thrown in without stint or measure. By 1874, when his book was published, over 70,000 Native Americans languished on reservations, often on lands reduced to a fraction of their original territories. The Pine Ridge Reservation, for example, shrank from 60 million acres in 1868 to 2.8 million by 1889, plagued by disease and starvation. Custer's words, penned after witnessing the squalor of early agencies, reflect a grim awareness of the system's failures. Historian D. Brown notes that Custer's critique exposed the hypocrisy of federal policy, though his own campaigns enforced it. Custer challenged the popular belief that the U.S. Army eagerly sought wars with native tribes. In My Life on the Plains, he declared, "Of all classes of our population, the Army and the people living on the frontier entertain the greatest dread of an Indian war." He claimed soldiers and settlers who faced the brunt of violence were willing to make sacrifices to avoid conflict. Yet, this assertion strains credulity. From 1866 to 1890, the Army fought over 1,000 engagements in the Indian Wars, costing $1 million annually by 1870. Historian Robert Utley argues that Custer's claim ignored the Army's role in provoking hostilities through treaty violations and land seizures. His words seem more defensive than truthful, shielding the military's image. Custer further insisted that no officer in peacetime desired war with native tribes. He wrote in 1872 that he had yet to meet a soldier who craved such conflict, emphasizing the horrors of Indian wars. This statement, however, clashes with historical reality. The Army's campaigns, like the 1868 Washita attack that killed 103 Cheyenne, were often preemptive, targeting tribes resisting encroachment. Between 1865 and 1876, the U.S. signed 370 treaties with tribes, only to break most, sparking resistance. Historian Richard White calls Custer's assertion a convenient fiction as officers, including Custer, pursued promotions through battlefield success. His denial of warmongering appears as a calculated attempt to deflect criticism. Custer found peaceable native villages near frontier posts to be a source of fascination. In My Life on the Plains, he described their daily visits as pleasant at all times and always interesting, marked by barter, horse races, dances, and fantastic ceremonies. By 1867, posts like Fort Riley housed 300 soldiers and hosted up to 500 native visitors monthly, mostly Cheyenne and Kiowa, trading buffalo hides for goods. Custer noted the presence of chiefs, warriors, and even children there, rude interchange of civilities, creating a vibrant scene. Historian Lewis Warren observes that Custer's descriptions reveal a genuine curiosity, contrasting with his combative role. These interactions hint at a fleeting possibility of coexistence. These friendly villages, Custer wrote, were far more agreeable as neighbors than as crafty, bloodthirsty enemies. He preferred their lively presence to the threat of ambush, a sentiment rooted in his experiences. In 1867, near Fort Larned, 200 Cheyenne camped peacefully, their lodges dotting the plains, while Custer's 7th Cavalry patrolled nearby. Such moments were rare. By 1870, escalating conflicts displaced 15,000 Plains Indians. Custer's preference for peace reflects a pragmatic streak, yet his actions, like the Washita campaign, fueled hostility. Historian Paul Hutton notes that Custer's words betray a nostalgia for harmony, undermined by the violence his orders wrought. During the Hancock campaign of the 18th of April, 67, Custer witnessed a Cheyenne battle line that left him awestruck. He described it as one of the finest and most imposing military displays he had ever seen. A formation of 300 warriors stretched across the plains. Clad in bright war paint, crowned with feathered bonnets, and wielding lances with crimson pennants, they blocked his 1,400-strong column, signaling defiance. This encounter, detailed in My Life on the Plains, cost no lives but showcased Cheyenne prowess. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen calls it a masterclass in psychological warfare, forcing Custer to negotiate rather than fight. His admiration underscores the Cheyennes' tactical brilliance. The Cheyenne warriors, Custer noted, were a vision of martial splendor. Their line, formed near the Smoky Hill River, included 150 dog soldiers, elite fighters, renowned for their courage. Each carried a bow, quiver, and lance, their horses painted with sacred symbols. Custer's column, with 900 cavalry and 500 infantry, faced a force outnumbered but undaunted. He wrote of chiefs riding along the line, rallying their men for deeds of heroism. Historian John Moore argues that Custer's vivid account captures the Cheyennes' cultural pride, a rare acknowledgement from a U.S. officer. This moment reveals his respect for their disciplined resistance. Custer singled out the Cheyenne dog soldiers as the most troublesome, daring, and warlike band on the plains. Comprising 200 to 300 warriors by 1867, they drew from multiple tribes but were primarily Cheyenne, known for attacking settlements and troops. In 1868 alone, they led 50 raids, killing 120 settlers and soldiers. Custer described their magnificent physique and demeanor, calling them closer to the ideal warrior than any tribe. His account in My Life on the Plains blends awe with caution, recognizing their threat. Historian Thomas Powers notes that Custer's praise reflects both admiration and fear, highlighting the dog soldiers' unmatched ferocity. In a skirmish detailed in My Life on the Plains, Custer watched a Cheyenne warrior's horse shot out from under him, throwing the rider to the ground. As Custer ordered a pursuit, another warrior galloped forward on a swift pony, allowing the fallen man to leap behind him. Doubly burdened, the pony sped away, evading capture. Of the 50 troopers sent, none succeeded. Custer admitted feeling satisfaction, if not gladness, at their escape, moved by their daring. Historian Evan Connell calls this a rare glimpse of Custer's humanity, where he valued bravery over victory. The incident underscores his complex emotional response to his foes. Custer's fleeting tenderness for the escaping warriors stemmed from their individual daring and heroic display of comradeship. This moment, from an 1867 encounter with 30 Cheyenne raiders, saw no casualties but left a mark on Custer. He wrote of the warriors' swift recovery and the rescuers' bold ride, a scene of raw courage. The 7th Cavalry, with 600 men, often faced such hit-and-run tactics, losing 12 horses that year. Historian Joseph Agonito argues that Custer's reaction reveals a soldier torn between duty and respect. a tension that defined his interactions with native warriors throughout his career. Custer's encounter with the Kiowa warrior Setanta in 1867 reveals a tangled web of admiration and conflict. Setanta, a towering figure among the Kiowa, was wanted for orchestrating raids, including the 1866 attack on the Box family in Texas, where 5 settlers were killed and 2 children abducted. Custer met him during negotiations near Fort Dodge, Kansas, where Setanta, adorned in a red blanket and silver armbands, spoke with commanding presence. In My Life on the Plains, Custer called him remarkable for his powers of oratory, and noted his fierce resistance to the advances of civilization. This description, tinged with colonial bias, betrays a grudging respect. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen notes that Custer's portrayal casts Setanta as both noble and defiant, a duality that mirrors Custer's own contradictions as a soldier enforcing U.S. policy. Setanta's opposition to reservation life, which by 1867 confined 4,000 Kiowa to a 2.8 million acre tract in Indian Territory, earned Custer's attention. He described Setanta's refusal to abandon his accustomed mode of life for the uneventful existence of a reservation Indian. Yet, Setanta's raids, which killed 47 settlers between 1866 and 1868, made him a target. Custer's 7th Cavalry pursued him for over a year, covering 1,200 miles across Kansas and Texas. Despite this, Custer's words suggest a fascination with Setanta's charisma and resolve. Historian Thomas Powers argues that Custer saw in Setanta a reflection of his own rebellious spirit, a warrior unbound by constraints, yet doomed by the era's relentless expansion. During Setanta's imprisonment in 1867, Custer forged an unlikely bond with his son, a young Kiowa warrior who visited the 7th Cavalry's camp near Fort Leavenworth. In My Life on the Plains, Custer recounts their friendly matches at target practice, where they fired rifles at targets 100 yards away. Setanta's son, a skilled marksman, hit 9 out of 10 shots, impressing Custer, who matched him with 8. These contests, held over 3 weeks, saw 50 soldiers and 20 Kiowa mingle, a rare moment of camaraderie. Custer wrote that the son was the best shot in the tribe, a claim Setanta himself endorsed. Historian Lewis Warren calls this a strange interlude of peace, where personal respect transcended the broader conflict, though it did little to alter the Kiowa's fate. In the Yellowstone Campaign of 1873, Custer relied heavily on Bloody Knife, a half-Arikara, half-Lakota scout whose instincts proved invaluable. Born in 1840, Bloody Knife had lived among the Lakota before joining the U.S. Army, bringing intimate knowledge of the northern plains. Custer, commanding 1,500 men across 800 miles, called him "my favorite scout," a title earned through daring reconnaissance. In the 18th of August 73, Bloody Knife led 20 scouts ahead of the column, spotting Lakota camps that housed 900 warriors. His reports averted ambushes, saving 30 lives in one skirmish. Historian Evan Connell notes that Custer's trust in Bloody Knife was absolute, a bond rooted in mutual reliance amid the campaign's grueling conditions. When Bloody Knife's enlistment ended in 1873, Custer hired him as a civilian scout, raising his pay from $13 to $50 a month. This increase, equivalent to a sergeant's wage, was rare for native scouts, who numbered 300 across the Army but earned just $10 monthly. Custer's decision, recorded in Army payrolls, reflected Bloody Knife's critical role in navigating the Yellowstone's rugged terrain, where 200 miles of unmapped rivers challenged the expedition. He guided 400 wagons through dense forests, ensuring supplies reached 1,200 troops. Historian Joseph Agonito argues that Custer's generosity signaled deep respect, though it also tied Bloody Knife to a campaign against his Lakota kin, highlighting the scouts' divided loyalties. Custer's praise for Bloody Knife extended to a formal request for a bonus, sent to Army headquarters on the 18th of September 73. He wrote that Bloody Knife's unceasing efforts and extraordinary labors as a guide were unmatched, noting his horse was worn out after 600 miles of scouting. During the campaign, Bloody Knife rode 50 miles daily, twice the Army's pace, to scout Lakota positions. His work saved 15 soldiers in a July ambush by spotting 200 warriors hidden in a ravine. Custer's letter, preserved in National Archives, sought $100, a sum equal to 2 months' officer pay. Historian Robert Utley calls this a rare advocacy for a native ally, underscoring Custer's reliance on Bloody Knife's skill. Bloody Knife's sand-drawn maps, detailed in Elizabeth Custer's 1885 memoir Boots and Saddles, guided Custer through the Yellowstone's uncharted lands. Sitting on the grass with 10 dogs around them, Custer and Bloody Knife traced rivers and hills with a stick, mapping routes for 1,000 troops. These sessions, held over 12 days, covered 300 square miles, ensuring safe passage past Lakota strongholds. Elizabeth noted Bloody Knife's excellent maps, which pinpointed 15 water sources critical for 2,000 horses. Historian D. Brown writes that their collaboration humanized Custer, revealing a partnership that transcended rank and race, though it served a campaign to subdue the Lakota. In the 18th of August 73 Yellowstone skirmish, Custer watched a Lakota warrior, clad in a wolfskin cape, gallop before his lines, taunting 400 soldiers with a raised lance. Bloody Knife, gripping a Henry rifle, vowed to send him to the happy hunting ground, a Lakota afterlife. The warrior, part of a 150-man force, drew fire from 50 troopers, escaping unharmed after 3 passes. Custer, standing with 20 men, noted Bloody Knife's handsome face lighted up by the fire of battle. The skirmish cost 2 soldiers' lives and 10 Lakota casualties. Historian T.J. Stiles argues that Custer's vivid account captures the intensity of frontier combat, where personal vendettas, like Bloody Knife's, fueled the fight. Custer acknowledged the Lakota's great superiority in the Yellowstone campaign, a rare admission of their strength. Under Sitting Bull and Gall, 1,200 Lakota warriors outnumbered Custer's 900-man force, excelling in horsemanship and marksmanship. In the 18th of August 73, 300 Lakota ambushed 100 troopers, killing 5 and wounding 12 in 20 minutes, using repeating rifles against single-shot carbines. Custer wrote in My Life on the Plains that their ability to handle arms and horses surpassed his men. Historian Richard Slotkin notes that Custer's candor reflected tactical respect, though it did not soften his resolve to defeat them, a prelude to the fatal miscalculation at Little Bighorn. After the Black Hills expedition of 1874, Custer told a Chicago Tribune reporter he was heartily glad to avoid fighting the Sioux. He claimed to have sent Pacific messages to 2,000 Lakota, led by Red Cloud, to avert conflict. The expedition, with 1,000 troops and 110 wagons, mapped 1,200 square miles, sparking a gold rush that drew 15,000 miners by 1876, violating the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. Custer's restraint, if genuine, saved 200 lives, as Sioux raids killed 47 settlers that year. Historian Paul Hutton calls his claim strategic posturing, as Custer's report lured prospectors, escalating tensions that led to the 1876 campaign and his final battle. Custer's claim of restraint in the 1874 Black Hills expedition, where he avoided conflict with the Sioux, sits uneasily with his reputation for boldness. His assertion to a Chicago Tribune reporter that he sent pacific messages to avert a fight with 2,000 Lakota seems at odds with his record of aggressive tactics, such as the 1868 Washita attack that killed 103 Cheyenne. The Black Hills expedition, spanning 60 days and covering 1,200 square miles, ignited a gold rush, drawing 15,000 prospectors by 1876, which violated the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty and provoked Sioux resistance. Historian Robert Utley suggests Custer's peaceful stance was less about diplomacy and more about public image, as his reports fueled the very tensions he claimed to avoid. This contradiction raises doubts about his sincerity. In the 18th of July 75 interview with the New York Herald, Custer defended the deep attachment of Native peoples to their ancestral lands. He described their love for the lands containing the bones of their ancestors as almost a religion, a sentiment he believed white settlers failed to grasp. By 1875, the U.S. had seized 90 million acres of tribal land since the 1860s, reducing Lakota territory alone by 60%. Custer's words, spoken after a decade of campaigns, reflect an understanding of Native grief over dispossession. Historian D. Brown notes that Custer's observation revealed a rare empathy, though his role in enforcing land cessions, like the 1874 Black Hills Survey, deepened the very losses he acknowledged. Custer argued that the reservation system's success hinged on the U.S. government honoring its promises to Native tribes. In the same 1875 interview, he criticized the systemic betrayal of treaties, which by 1876 had seen 370 agreements signed and 90% broken. Reservations like Pine Ridge, home to 7,000 Lakota, received only 50% of promised rations, leaving 3,000 people near starvation annually. Custer's critique, rooted in his observations of agency mismanagement, pointed to a policy that resented the Indians' proud and haughty nature. Historian Richard Slotkin calls this a sharp indictment of federal failure, yet Custer's own actions, including leading 1,000 troops to secure reservation boundaries, tied him to the system he faulted. In the 18th of April 76, Custer testified before Congress, exposing corruption in President Ulysses S. Grant's administration that starved both soldiers and Native peoples. He detailed how traders at posts like Fort Lincoln sold substandard supplies, with 20% of goods spoiled or missing. For instance, 10,000 bushels of grain meant for 5,000 reservation Indians in Dakota Territory were diverted or rotten in 1875, leaving 2,000 people without food for weeks. Custer's testimony, spanning 3 days and 200 pages of records, implicated Grant's brother in profiteering, costing the Army $500,000 yearly. Historian T.J. Stiles argues that Custer's boldness risked his career, but his revelations highlighted the human toll of greed on both soldiers and tribes. Custer recounted a specific instance of corruption during his testimony, describing how a trader offered him 5,000 bushels of spoiled corn, already sold to an Indian agency, for Fort Lincoln's 800 troops. When he refused, Washington ordered him to accept it, threatening disciplinary action. This incident, documented in Congressional Report Number 799, exposed a system where 30% of agency supplies were defective, affecting 15,000 Native people across 10 reservations. Custer's defiance, though fleeting, showed his frustration with a bureaucracy that prioritized profit over lives. Historian Evan Connell notes that Custer's stand was principled, yet his inability to reform the system left Native communities and his own men vulnerable. At Fort Abraham Lincoln in 1875, Custer sought to feed 1,200 starving Native people, mostly Lakota, who camped near the post seeking aid. He requested permission to issue rations, citing a law allowing temporary aid at military posts. The Indian Bureau, overseeing 70,000 reservation Indians, denied his request, insisting on handling distribution despite delivering only 40% of promised food. For 2 months, 800 Lakota families went hungry, with 200 children reported malnourished. Custer's effort, detailed in his 1876 testimony, failed to sway officials. Historian Paul Hutton calls this a mischance for compassion, underscoring Custer's limited power against a callous bureaucracy that deepened native suffering. Before the Little Bighorn campaign in the 18th of June 76, Custer gifted Bloody Knife, his trusted Arikara Lakota scout, a silver medal engraved with his name and a handkerchief adorned with blue stars. These tokens, presented at Fort Lincoln to the 35-year-old scout, symbolized a bond forged over 3 years and 2,000 miles of shared trails. Bloody Knife, one of 40 Arikara scouts, had saved 50 soldiers' lives in the 1873 Yellowstone campaign. Elizabeth Custer later wrote in Following the Guidon that her husband studied to bring Bloody Knife something unique, a gesture of personal loyalty. Historian Joseph Agonito argues that the gifts reflected Custer's deep trust, a rare connection in a war that pitted allies against kin. Custer held his Crow Scouts in high esteem, describing them as magnificent-looking men who admired his tenacity. In the 18th of June 76, he met 25 Crow Scouts near the Tongue River, each clad in deerskin and armed with carbines. They praised his reputation, joking they would eat mule under his command, a nod to his endurance in the 1868 Washita campaign, where 100 troops survived on horseflesh. The Crow, numbering 1,700 in Montana, allied with the U.S. against their Lakota rivals, providing 150 scouts in 1876. Custer's admiration, recorded in a letter to his wife, highlights their shared warrior ethos. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen notes that Custer saw the Crow as kindred spirits, though their alliance served U.S. aims. Custer promised Bloody Knife and his 20 Arikara scouts a trip to Washington, D.C., and a fine house for Bloody Knife if they defeated the Sioux in 1876. In the 21st of June meeting, documented by Scout Red Star, Custer vowed to secure plenty to eat for all time for their 300 families. This pledge, made to 40 scouts at the Rosebud River, aimed to bolster morale before facing 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne. The Arikara, with 1,400 people, faced starvation after losing 80% of their land since 1851. Historian Thomas Powers calls Custer's promise a fleeting vision of reward, doomed by the campaign's tragic end, yet it reveals his effort to inspire loyalty. Arikara scout Red Star, aged 30, recalled Custer's empathy, stating, "Custer had a heart like an Indian." In the 18th of June, 76, during a council with 15 Arikara scouts, Custer joined their ceremonies, ensuring rituals were complete, even suggesting a forgotten chant. His attention to their traditions, like the sacred pipe ceremony, honored the Arikara's 500-year cultural heritage. Red Star's account, preserved in oral histories, notes Custer's presence as 20 scouts sang victory songs. Historian Louis Warren argues that Custer's engagement with Arikara customs showed genuine respect, a stark contrast to his role in battling their Lakota foes, highlighting the complexity of his character. Critics have long claimed that George Armstrong Custer ignored his native scouts before the Battle of the Little Bighorn, leading to his catastrophic defeat. However, Arikara scout Red Star, an eyewitness, revealed a more nuanced truth. On the 24th of June, 1876, at a council near the Rosebud River, 25 Crow Scouts, led by Half Yellow Face, urged Custer to attack the Lakota and Cheyenne encampment immediately, believing the 2,000 warriors had not yet spotted his 647-man force. In contrast, 15 Arikara scouts, including Red Star, advised waiting until dark to encircle the camp, citing its size, with 1,500 lodges housing 8,000 people. Custer, swayed by the Crows' urgency, dismissed the Arikara's caution. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen notes that Custer's choice reflected the scouts' conflicting intelligence, not outright dismissal, but it sealed his fate. Custer's decision to follow the Crow scouts stemmed from his fear that the massive Lakota and Cheyenne village would scatter if he delayed. On the 25th of June, 1876, he stood atop a ridge, observing the camp along the Little Bighorn River, which stretched 3 miles and housed 10,000 people, including 2,500 warriors. Red Star recalled Custer's insistence. "I say we have not been seen," rejecting Arikara scout. Big Belly's warning that the Sioux had already detected them. The Crow, with 150 years of rivalry against the Lakota, argued that capturing the camp's 5,000 horses would cripple their mobility. Custer agreed, ordering an immediate assault. Historian Robert Utley argues that Custer's trust in the Crow was logical but fatally optimistic, underestimating the village's defensive strength. The summer campaign of 1876 was a massive operation, involving 3 army columns totaling 2,500 troops under Generals Alfred Terry, George Crook, and Colonel John Gibbon. Their goal was to force 15,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho onto reservations, ending resistance in the northern plains. Custer's 7th Cavalry, with 647 men and 40 native scouts, marched 200 miles from Fort Lincoln, Dakota Territory, to converge on the Little Bighorn by the 25th of June. Crook's 1,000-man column had retreated, after losing 28 men to 1,500 Sioux at Rosebud Creek on the 17th of June, leaving Custer's force to strike first. Historian D. Brown writes that the campaign scale overwhelmed Custer's smaller command, setting the stage for a lopsided clash. On the 25th of June, 1876, Custer launched his attack on the Lakota and Cheyenne encampment, dividing his 12 companies into 3 battalions. He led 5 companies, 210 men, directly toward the village, expecting to overwhelm its defenses. Clad in a buckskin jacket and wide-brimmed hat, he rode his horse Vic at the forefront, unaware that 2,500 warriors, armed with 400 repeating rifles, awaited. The camp, housing 1,800 families, rallied swiftly, with leaders like Crazy Horse and Gall directing a counterattack. Within 90 minutes, Custer's force was surrounded on a hill, now called Last Stand Hill. Historian Evan Connell notes that Custer's underestimation of the enemy's numbers and resolve led to a rapid collapse, as his scouts' warnings proved tragically accurate. The Lakota and Cheyenne, with superior numbers and skill, annihilated Custer's 5 companies, killing 268 soldiers, including Custer, in a stunning victory. Warriors, painted with red and black war symbols, used bows, lances, and rifles to overwhelm the 7th Cavalry, which lost 55% of its men in the battle. The Lakota and Cheyenne suffered 60 to 100 casualties, a fraction of their 2,500 fighters. Their triumph, one of the largest native victories in the Indian Wars, showcased tactical brilliance, with 1,000 warriors encircling Custer's men in 20 minutes. Historian Richard Slotkin calls it a testament to native resilience, a fleeting triumph against a U.S. campaign that displaced 10,000 Plains Indians by 1877. Custer's death at age 36 cemented his legend as a fallen hero to some and a reckless commander to others. but it obscured the voices of the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors who outfought him. The battle, costing the U.S. $2 million in equipment and lives, shocked a nation celebrating its centennial, with 500 newspaper articles published by the 18th of July, 76. Yet, the native perspective, recorded in oral accounts by warriors like Two Moons, who led 300 Cheyenne, emphasized defense of their 1,500 lodges. Historian Thomas Powers argues that Custer's myth overshadowed the native victory, which briefly halted U.S. expansion, though 5,000 Lakota were forced onto reservations within a year. Custer's writings, particularly My Life on the Plains, reveal a man who admired native courage yet enforced policies that eroded their way of life. Between 1867 and 1876, his campaigns displaced 20,000 Plains Indians, with 3,000 killed or confined. Yet, he praised warriors like the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, who led 200 raids, as ideal in valor. His 256-page memoir, serialized in the Galaxy, blends vivid battle accounts with reflections on native autonomy, lamenting their loss to reservations. Historian Joseph Agonito notes that Custer's admiration was genuine but impotent, as his role in battles like Washita, which destroyed 800 Cheyenne ponies, advanced the very conquest he critiqued. Custer's respect for warriors like Satanta and Bloody Knife humanizes a figure often vilified. Satanta, imprisoned after leading 50 Kiowa raids, shared rifle contests with Custer, who hit 8 of 10 targets. Bloody Knife, scouting 2,000 miles, saved 50 lives and earned a $50 monthly wage, rare for 300 native scouts. These bonds, detailed in Custer's letters and Elizabeth's memoirs, show a soldier who valued individual bravery, yet his campaigns, costing 1,200 native lives, fueled suffering. Historian Lewis Warren writes that Custer's personal connections could not undo his systemic impact, a paradox that defines his legacy as both a man and a myth in the American frontier. Custer's paradox, admiring the courage of warriors like Satanta and Bloody Knife, while leading campaigns that shattered their world, encapsulates the tragedy of the American frontier. The Lakota and Cheyenne victory at Little Bighorn, where 2,500 warriors defended 1,800 families, stands as a powerful testament to their resilience against a tide that claimed 20,000 Plains Indians by 1877. Their triumph, though fleeting, echoes in oral histories, preserving the voices of those who fought for their way of life. Custer's writings, filled with